Hello, everyone. My name is Beth Brady, and we are here to talk about hiring Hispanics in the marketplace. And we have this wonderful panel here. I am not going to introduce all of us because we want to get right into it. All of our bios, myself included, are we're listed here by name, and our bios are included. So please feel free to go look us up and hear what our backgrounds are. But I am going to kick this off with a little story. I work for a fractional CMO. I work for a number of companies, and right now I'm working for several. And one of the companies, we are working very hard to hire a very senior level, a vice president of business development. And we've gone through 3 recruitment agencies and have yet to come up with the candidate, with a slate of candidates, let alone the winning candidate. So I start with that, and I'm going to throw it over to Hugo, and I'm going to say, what do you think is going on there? You know, you're at P&G and you do talent acquisition, so help us understand what is going on, filling a very senior level position with us specifically trying to find a Hispanic candidate.
Yes, and I think unfortunately that's a reality that we face on a day-to-day basis in talent acquisition, and I believe that it's across all levels, right? And I think sometimes what I believe that is important, or what we try to coach our organizations, is about workforce planning and planning ahead of time into the pipelines. Because when we have contradicting priorities in terms of serving up the business as quick as we can with diversity, it could be a conflicting priority. So we try to plan ahead of the time, build the pipelines, connect with candidates, and build these diverse pipelines in order to cover the positions when we have the need and recruit ahead of the need, because unfortunately trying to do it super quickly could not be very efficient for diversity.
John Shipp, who for everyone goes by Shipp, so that's what we'll be calling him, Shipp. So tell us, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it, there's two streams I think that really play into this. One is a reputation stream. So if you look at talent and what's going to make them want to come to your organization, a lot of it has to do with reputation, right? So if you have a reputation for promoting diverse talent and you see diverse talent inside the organization, that reputation will attract specific talent. I think the other one is more about the sourcing. And I think traditionally, when organizations look at where am I going to hire someone from, they look at what are my pockets of schools, or what are my pockets of organizations that I've worked with before, and I'm going to go to those because it's always worked. And especially when you're trying to improve diversity, sometimes you have to step out of that archetype or that structure that you created and say, I'm going to fish in different areas. And ultimately, I think when you do that, you end up getting more diverse talent. So that will probably be my provocation on this one. Focus on reputation and selling that story, and then also looking at a different source.
Thank you, Shipp. That was very helpful. So the next question I'd like to throw out to Nina, who represents, a very small portion of the Hispanic population as a CEO and founder of a very large company. But what do you think, Nina, are the most important barriers that keep Hispanics at a disadvantage during the hiring process?
Well, 2 quick comments I want to make. I love what Hugo and John said about the last question, and I just really want to add the labor markets on top of that. Today in America, we are talking a lot about diversity. So today there is a heightened awareness and a heightened intentionality about diversity. And it just makes the labor markets really hard. I think people of color are in high demand, and you have to be, both to their point, what Hugo and John said, very strategic and very targeted. When I looked at that, when I listened to your question, I'm trying to speak in generalities. Mm-hmm. And generally speaking, now this has changed. I will caveat that my answer has changed in the last decade, and I would have said education. That has changed in the last decade. Today, in very large cities like California, we have a 70% increase in the amount of Hispanics that are getting a college education, but that hasn't always been the case. And so I don't know that there are barriers in bringing Hispanics into a corporation at an entry level. I think the barriers exist at a C-suite level, at a managerial level, at a VP level. No different in the Hispanic business community, by the way. There are 4.6 million Hispanic-owned businesses in this country, but very, very few, less than 10% or over $1 million in revenue. So I don't think the challenges are at the entry level for a candidate or for a business starting the business. I think the challenges is kind of moving up.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm going to flip to another question unless someone would like to add to Nina's points.
Actually, Bethy, I'd like to jump in there because really great comments. I think the issue that we have is representation. Our customers today connect with the brand. You have to be authentic. You have to mean something. They have to feel like there can be their own true self when they're interacting with the company, and more importantly, when they're an employee or a team member of the organization. That's actually what leads to the first question. The gap that we have in representation at the C-suite or the executive level is because we have a lack of representation across organizations coming in the front door, and then somebody giving them that mentorship and that guidance to help throughout their career, and creating very diverse pools so that you're hiring the right candidate. And I think that's where this challenge comes in. As I said, I think it's only 4% of all Fortune 500 companies have Hispanic representation at the executive level. But you have to represent with good quality positions, professional positions, bringing folks in, fostering that talent, and then promoting that talent. Mm-hmm. And so we're a little bit behind, but I think you can't begin planting that tree, right? That old saying, when's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago? The next best time is now. You have to get at it right now if we're going to see a difference in the next several years.
That was great. Thank you for that. I'm going to throw it over to Hugo again here and ask the question of what is the role of HR in managing this issue? And it's not just Hispanics, but it's diversity in general, but certainly Hispanics at all levels need to be represented better. And it's not just represented. There's a whole point around development that is also critical. What is that role of HR?
That's a great question, and actually I love all the comments, because in the first question that you asked, I kind of struggled a little bit trying to point like the specific case of an executive in a position, but I believe it's a funnel. To Nina's comment, it depends on the position and depends on representation, it depends on availability, and every position could be different. So I think we as HR people, we need to play a role in being intentional. Understanding the roles, understanding what we're trying to recruit, understanding availability in the market, understanding areas that we have to be very intentional, develop the talent, but also representing our stories, our employee value proposition out there so people can see themselves in high levels in the company, executive levels in the companies, and entry levels in the companies, and feel that they could be their true self and have that family inside the organization. So I think to your question, workforce planning and being very intentional in terms of understanding availability and pockets of areas that we have to develop to make sure that we can get that representation.
That's great.
Beth, if I could...
I was just going to throw it over to you, Nina, to add on to that, because I think in the IT world, this must be a real challenge. I know when I worked in financial services, that was always the standard was, well, there's not that many available talent in the financial service, but IT, I imagine, is one of those areas.
I love what Hugo was saying, and I just want to build on his answer because it was right on the money. Human resources has the opportunity to track and measure. That is so critical. I find that we have to be sincere about diversity, but we also have to be serious, because there are people and companies that are sincere about growing their diversity, but being serious means that you track, measure, you track trends, you understand why they're leaving, how they're coming, where they're going, and you track it, you measure it, and you duplicate it. So for me, that is critical for an HR department. And today we have so many tools to do just that. What I would add is what I have seen. I've had the pleasure, I serve the Fortune 500, and oftentimes because I'm an advocate of the Hispanic community, I get the opportunity to speak internally to these companies, to their ERG groups, to their executives. And what I have found is the companies that win, the companies that really understand this, they understand that it's not just about bringing talent in at the entry level, but growing them. And so I find that they do two things really, really well. Number one, they capture the individual as they're moving up. They highlight and create a program that highlights rising stars of the company or people that have a good trajectory. I think, and then they bring them together they bring them together to grow as a cohort, because there's studies that done is that when you're growing together collectively with people to your right and to your left that are feeling and going through the same experiences that you are, you can make that journey and that innovation much more rich to experience. And so I've had the opportunity to address certain groups in corporate America where Hispanics are a group, the prominent, the ones that are rising stars, and that the company is intentional about coupling them with mentors and with sponsors. And then the second thing that I've seen companies that win really do is they give them stretch roles. We cannot grow unless we are provided the opportunity to do as such. Those stretch roles are really critical, and HR can send that message to its senior level in the company. So to me, it's those stretch roles, and it's capturing them and really elevating them on their way up.
Thank you, Nina. That was really awesome, those comments. I'm going to throw this over to Cesar and then ask Shipp to comment after him. But what Nina referred to is that sort of community that you need to help build, so that you have people that you can look up to, but people on either side of you, and people that you can mentor coming up. What is the role of the ERG, right? I've been in many companies where way back in the day, and I don't want to date myself, where the ERG was more of a social club. But these days, I think with diversity being such a huge issue and such an important, as Hugo said, workforce issue, they need to, if they're not, play a different role. So Cesar, can you comment on that? And then John, can you give me your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great, Beth. And you're right on. I think when we first got into the world of ERGs, it was about flag, food, and fun at the end of the day. But really, was that moving the needle? Was that making a change? And that got old after a little while. You can only do so many tastes around the world in the cafeteria. So what we really did was being very intentional in American Family is shifting to a BRG, so a business resource group. And so, for example, I'm the executive sponsor of the Hispanic Latinx BRG. And each team has a leadership to it. So we have a co-lead, we have a lead, a co-lead, and then we call them the belts, which is our BRG executive leadership team. This is helping employees build those skills to work on projects, collaborate cross-divisionally, in our case, across opcos. So they get those skills, and then they get really that exposure to executives in the organization, leading more meaningful events, doing things in the community. And actually in the Hispanic Latinx BRG, the overarching charge is, how do we get more representation into American Family? How do we partner with companies like Centro Hispano in Madison that brings us employees that are looking to get into the organization, apply their talents, working with United Way so that we can bring on folks in their hire program, and really great opportunity for our human resources partners, our people partners, because they pay the bill for 2 years. It's a carry along. And the goal there is to get them in and really have them a part of American Family, because Nina made some really great comments. We can bring Latinos into our companies, but it's keeping them is what the challenge is. If they don't feel like they belong, if they don't see that representation, you're going to go somewhere that you will. And in today's labor market, which is challenging, companies have to step up because people are voting with their feet where they like to work. And so it's really critical that those roles are meaningful in those BRGs or ERGs, as they're commonly referred to, and that they have a business purpose and they really elevate the individuals into more leadership and greater exposure for their career.
Thanks, Cesar. Shipp.
Yeah, I would say our approach is very similar to Cesar talked about, but the way we approach it is we say that there's really 4 areas that we want our employee resource groups to focus on. Those areas are diversity inclusion, which is more just the representation, and then what are the programs that can help elevate the people in those communities. The second pillar is marketplace. So thinking about how can we connect with consumers in those specific demographics. So who better to help us understand that than the people that are in that community. Value chain, which is more around supplier diversity. So what are the corporations or businesses, usually a little bit smaller than when we tended to work with, but what are those businesses from a procurement standpoint that we can partner with to also improve the economic empowerment of those communities? And then the last one is more community support, which is how can we impact those communities and help them grow, whether that's through education or equality and civil rights. So we've taken a very similar approach where we say you're not just a club, you also are pulled into our business, and we have expectations of them that they're presenting out to our executive leadership on a quarterly basis to give us insights on these particular pillars and what we should be doing.
Thank you for that. That's very insightful. And I think that the whole ERG world is evolving, and those companies that are moving their ERGs to be business centered, business focused, as opposed to what we said, what was it? Flags, fun, and food. But anyway, I love that. I'm going to remember that. Those are the companies that are going to succeed. So kudos to both of your companies for doing that. I'm going to ask Hugo a question here. Can you help me understand early stage in your career versus an experienced hire? What are those factors, those differentiating factors for the two? I'm going to just give another story. I've come across so many diverse peers and colleagues of mine over time that have told stories of leaving a company at a very senior level and just having to abandon that company to go somewhere else. What do you think is at play there for those people versus people that are younger in their career?
I think I would divide my answer into pillars, because the first one is from the hiring perspective, and the second one is definitely from the development perspective of these employees. So I think the hiring perspective of experienced hires and early career is completely different. The reason is because, of course, you have usually, or in companies like us, we have a bigger pool of positions in the lower levels or entry levels of the organization. But you also, because of how the generations are progressing, you have more availability in the market and the representation is higher, right? So when they get into companies like P&G, they get in to positions where they have a lot of peers, they have a lot of people to create that community, etc., that will allow them to grow in the company more like this cohort kind of perspective versus the experienced hires piece. That is more on a specific position, is more isolated to hiring manager, a specific job to do in the day-to-day. And I believe in that part, if the hiring, but also development and connection and creating community, it's a little bit harder because you get into a more senior level, you don't have a cohort or a lot of peers doing a very similar job to the one that you do. And your network can be more one-on-one basis with your hiring manager or your organization. So what we have been doing in P&G, we do have a Hispanic network. They are involved in our recruiting leg too. They're interviewers, they're mentors, they're coaches, and even in the interviewing process and everything, we connect them to the community so they can build those relationships even before getting and starting in the company itself.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And Nina, I would love your thoughts on this question as well.
I think my answer would be no different than what we've already heard, particularly when Cesar talked about and Shipp talked about creating a brand and understanding the culture. If you don't have programs and services that are helping them that they identify with, then people won't stay. If you are inviting them to have a rich experience, to be their whole selves and to grow their leadership, there is no reason to leave. And so that really is the answer, is how can the company be very intentional at every level to really attract, maintain, support, and continue to promote Hispanics in the workforce.
Thank you.
It's actually not that. My answer is simplistic. It's just very difficult to do.
It's difficult to actually execute.
Right.
Beth, do you mind if I
go ahead.
As well? You know what? I always remember this quote from Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. He said to his management team, "If you ever get confused, go to the store and ask the customer. They have all the money and all the answers." Right. And I think that's what this really boils down to. If we're not authentic, if we don't attract our customers and represent with our employees the customers we're trying to attract, we're going to lose this race. And if you think about it, Hispanic customers, by definition, get treated differently when they don't speak English. And so nowhere else in our society when we work, where you call in, you speak to an English-speaking care center rep, and then we transfer you to a translation service. It's inauthentic. It's a bad experience. And you pay the same premium as all other ethnicities coming into an organization. And so I think that intentional piece is setting up units. We have a 70-person call center exclusively Spanish speaking, which means it's led only by Spanish speaking managers and operations managers. That attracts people to the organization. It is our highest customer satisfaction team in all of our American Family Care Centers. So it's really being authentic and putting it out there and making sure your employees and the value propositions that you have for your brand and your customer come together.
And companies, just to add to that, I love what you said, Cesar, but one thing to keep in mind about the Hispanic community is that we're very loyal, a very loyal community, and we are watching. And so those little things that you're doing with intentionality are important, and they do contribute to the experience.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that having worked in the financial services industry as well, I know for a fact that it's a very complex world, and a lot of what we do out there has complexity to it. And if somebody isn't a native speaker, if it's their second language, and you're asking them to understand really complex, information, and they're having to do it in a different language, it's of course a huge barrier. And so I applaud what you're doing at American Family. That is really important to be able to do that in all industries, provide information in language so people know what they're getting into. I'm going to switch and say, okay, all of this is what the company can do internally. We've talked about some of the things that need to get done, but what are some of the external resources that are available to companies to be able to help them along? And I'm going to throw it to Shipp to start with that one.
Yeah, so our group, our talent acquisition group, has invested into a lot of research firms, and in these research firms, what they do for us is I'll use university as an example. Traditionally, we hire a lot of engineers because we're a beer industry and we make things, right? So a lot of our engineers are in these main schools, and that's where we've always gone. But these research firms, what they'll do for us is they'll say, here are other schools outside of these Big Ten schools that also have the same types of degree profiles that you're looking for, but they have a higher diverse population. And then that becomes part of our agnostic approach in being able to say, I'm going to still go to these schools that have always given us great success, but then I'm going to also go to a school that maybe I traditionally didn't go to, but then the Hispanic population of that particular university is much higher, say at ASU or something like that. So I think that's one way we use a lot of the research firms. The other thing I think is, measuring your success. I think that's, what Nina talked about is if you don't measure what you're doing, then you obviously can't improve. So we used a lot of third-party groups to kind of measure. I mean, part of this is EEOC compliance, but we use third-party groups to measure and say, in these particular locations, which you have corporate headquarters or corporate locations, here's the actual demographic. And with a little adjustment to your recruitment strategy, you can actually match what the talent availability is in those areas. If we don't have that information, then we can't say that, hey, there's a gap for us to actually be improved on. So that's how we use our external partnerships in a couple different ways. One for research, and then one just to give us the insights on what's the market availability.
Hugo, what about what you're doing at American Family? Are you using external resources, and if so, what do those look like? And actually, I'd like to know that I think everybody'd like to know that, listening from each of you, is what you're doing that they could also replicate.
Yeah, I'm gonna start with B&G in general, and what John was sharing is spot on. So I think it's related to being very intentional in terms of understanding what's out there in the market, understanding availability, geography, schools in general, where do we have representation, and make sure that they are aware we have opportunities for them, right? It's just being very clear in terms of our channel strategy, how we communicate our opportunities, where do we communicate our opportunities, but also to add value to these communities. So we do it through our brands. We do it through talent acquisition, making sure we have representation on school teams and alumni from different schools that can go back and give something to that community, right? Have networks there, share study cases, mentoring and coaching to make sure we have those pipelines. We also invest on programs in high schools for diverse candidates to make sure that we can engage with them since they are early in the process. We have scholarships, and we partner with organizations that have a pool of diverse talent to make sure that we can expand our message. So I think it's been intentional, understanding where the talent is, creating opportunities, and partner with the right organizations to get a high reach, I would say, in our communication.
That's great. Thank you. Nina.
Beth, what I would have to add to this conversation is the answer is all of the above, because having great partners, whether they're community partners or educational partners, and even a variety of others, are critical. But for me, where I sit, this is an area that I'm very familiar with. And the answer is software tools. Today, we have more software available to us than ever before. And so we have a tremendous amount of job board software, whether it's SheWork or Upwork or Glider or IPDN, and they become very sophisticated. There's a lot of AI and machine learning that are used to scrape information off our social media. I'll give you an example. It happened to my relative, actually, my cousin. She's a video programmer, a director of video programming, but her passion was cycling. She just loved cycling. She was a triathlete. She posted about it. She was very authentic in her posts. And she was approached by the competitor to Peloton because they wanted someone with her video programming experience, but that also knew and loved and are passionate about cycling. Like, they literally just scraped that off of her social media and they use that to target her specifically. These tools have become so sophisticated, and HR has an opportunity to really understand them in a deep way to target the kind of people that you would like. So I just wanted to say that software has evolved so much, and we should certainly take advantage of it.
Yeah, so true. So the social media comment is dead on. I mean, if this company that I've been working with, and they have been going through recruiters and haven't been able to find anyone, my comment was, well, let's go figure out through networking where those people are. Let's go find them ourselves. And these days, to your point, Nina, that's not something that is unattainable. We don't have to rely on others. But I would say that the recruiters got to get their act together if they want to stay in business, would be my only comment. But
well, there was a it's interesting that you bring that up. There was a couple of, I think it was about a month ago, there was a Wall Street Journal article stating that recruiters are the hardest position to fill today. And I want you to know, being in the recruiting industry.
Yeah. We are live, folks. So.
I want you to know that being in the recruiting industry, I completely agree with that. We are hiring people left and right, particularly recruiters, and they have been challenging and more challenging to find. And we rely on the software tools, AI, and machine learning to help us target who we're looking for.
Yeah.
Cesar, do you want to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's. I love that, Hugo. It's intentional, right? That begins with your CEO. It begins with your president and your chairman, all the way down, because it becomes a fabric of what you do. And so, for example, you might have talent acquisition doing their own thing. You may have somebody working in community affairs. So we're very purposeful. They work in concert. Our inclusive excellence team works in concert with our Institute for Social Justice, investing in the community, investing in startup businesses, investing in Hispanic entrepreneurship. That's huge, right? Because we do know that business cannot thrive unless the community is thriving. And so I think that's a big piece of it. But then it's also arm in arm with talent acquisition. So when you're doing events in a community, when you are focusing on building the community, you now have your talent acquisition folks embedded in that exact same process. So you're reaching in places you never have before. The days of going out to Career Builder is over, right? You have to be the one seeking that talent because there's just too much out there and too many places for folks to go. You have to be authentic. It has to be the fabric of your organization, and that helps you attract folks into the organization.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for that. All of those comments were wonderful. I'm gonna switch gears, and I'm going to build off of something I heard Shipp say. So this is the Hispanic Promise Summit. And so for many of you, you probably don't know, but I was very involved early on with building the Hispanic Promise. And what it was intended to always be was to have companies be purposeful about saying, we want to move forward, we want to make a difference, and we recognize it's about these different pillars of hiring and developing and retaining talent. But as we move forward, there is this notion of measurement, right? And Shipp mentioned this. And so my question out to the panel is, how should we be measuring companies' success and their progress? It's more than just a Excel spreadsheet that has green, yellow, red for the number of people at each level and the number of hires, which every company does. But what are those things that need to also be looked at to be able to say, yeah, we're making progress here, we're doing better, we're measuring something that maybe isn't just about the number of people in our organization, all levels. So I'm going to throw it out and see who wants to jump in on that one.
I'll take a stab first.
Okay.
All right. I think a lot of people know about our big brands, Budweiser, Bud Light, et cetera. And then if you start to think about the different demographics that we sell beer to, what you'll find is that other brands are important to those communities. Mm-hmm. So as an example, Chelada is super popular within the Hispanic community. And my wife is Hispanic and her whole family crushes it. I actually did not know that it was such a big thing until we started dating. And I think another measurement of success, maybe that's a little different than we typically look at, is what are the different types of consumers that you're starting to attract from a purchase standpoint because of your initiatives. So if I am a leader and my entire team is homogenous and I do not have someone from a particular represented community, the likelihood of me thinking of creating a new brand that's going to be attractive to this community, in this example, if I have no Hispanics on my team, how would I even think to myself, there's this other brand that perhaps we can go after, or this other style of beer that meets this occasion if I don't have people on the community. So I think one measurement that we've started to explore is, what is our actual market penetration in particular communities as a result of our diversity and inclusion initiatives?
Wow, that's awesome. What about others? Measurement. What are ways to measure our success, our progress going forward? Some that maybe your companies are doing, or some that you think that we should be figuring out how to do.
Well, Beth, I would say it goes back to the first comments I made at the beginning of the program, which is representation. Really, you don't want to get into this place where it seems that there's a quota system going on. But if you're representing your consumer, your public, the population of the United States, the last time I checked, the US is 50% women. The world's 50% women. So why wouldn't we have women in leadership positions and equal representation across all levels of the organization? Why wouldn't we have that for Hispanics, and not just in entry level, not just simply in service industry type work, but meaningful, powerful work that drives communities? And I think that's what it boils down to for me is, do you have your representation right? Because if you don't, you're always going to have a gap with your consumer.
Yeah.
So Beth, I love what Cesar just said, and just building on that, this is exactly the argument of why we need diversity, not just Latino, but diversity of thought in our boardrooms and across, beginning with our boardrooms and across all companies. There are studies done by the Hackett Group, studies done by McKinsey, that will show companies that have more diversity on their board, generally speaking, do better financially. I don't know if there's a correlation. I'll let you guys decide, but the studies are there that a diverse board equals a thriving, a stronger financial reputation of the company. So,
yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. And I love what you said, Cesar, because one of the things that Claudia and I have talked about is for what would be a BHAG for this whole effort? And one of them is that exactly your point, Cesar, that Hispanics would be represented as it represents in the population at all levels. So if Hispanics are 35% of the population, they should be 35% of the board. They should be 35% of the CEOs, 35 all the way down, and that goes for every population. And so to set something like that, and that is about representation. So I love that, and I love that notion. What about the others? What about Hugo? What is your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with everything they said. I think one of our main purposes with diversity in general is represent the consumer that we serve and making sure that we have them represented in every conversation we have in the company and decisions we make in the business. And I think the way to achieve that is what Cesar was saying about making sure we have representation, and something that you cannot measure, but it's our main purpose is making sure everyone can be themselves in the organization and see themselves reflected, have that family and community that they need. And I think when you see that in the hallways, it's the most fulfilling way to go to work, regardless of where you work or what you do. So I'm fully aligned with all the comments.
Great. All right, we are running down to the end of our panel here, but I'd like to throw a question out, one final question for everybody. And I'd like you to sort of, recognize that we are we have a lot of people watching this panel. What specific advice or approach would you recommend that companies take to attract more Hispanic talent? Like, what would be the one or two things that you think would make a bigger difference? And think about it from, you get a lot of excuses of, well, for example, the hospitality world, we have a huge amount of Hispanics in the hospitality world, but guess what? They're not at the senior level. So what's that piece of advice or direction you would provide to those listening? Let's start with Hugo.
I would say representation and visibility. Representation in every stage of the process. The stories that you share, in social media, the people that can interact with them. We need representation so they can see themselves and they can have the opportunity to ask questions and be reflected there. And visibility on stories, our employee value proposition, our leadership positions, and have the ability to share those stories. And I think that makes a ton of impact.
Yeah, and by the way, kudos to P&G for doing such a tremendous job of representing diversity in their advertising, which is a huge problem out there. And I think that you guys have been a leader in that. John, what's your thoughts on this? What should people be looking at doing?
Yeah, I think the representation piece is, it's very clear. Everyone's on the same track there. But then also I think that you have to have brands that people admire. And if they feel like something that is unique to me is something that this company also supports, then I can find a home there. And until we ensure that we have things for everyone, brands that represent everyone, ideas that represent ideas that maybe they grew up in, commercials that represent those ideas, then we have to do that, or else people won't feel like they can make a home there.
Thank you. Very good. Cesar?
Well, I think, everyone's comments are right on. I think when you bring it back inside your own house, it's really about advocacy. It's about everyone taking as a leader, taking that little step to make someone feel like they can move their career along the line. The same way in representation, maybe that I had the opportunity throughout my 23 years at American Family has had. But it's as simple as mentorship. We have a program where some of our reps can earn credits and coins, and there is an option that you can spend your rewards to have a coffee with me. And we do a virtual coffee, and I had a brand new employee about a year in, never knew anything about insurance, didn't think that she could ever be in the insurance world, and really asked me how she could get more involved, how she can grow her career. And by the time we were done, she actually said, I believe that I want to become an agency owner for American Family Insurance. And those things are really, I'm sure after this is told, I'm going to get a ton of emails from the recruiters and the sales managers in Phoenix, Arizona. But at any rate, those are the little things that make a very big difference, is making yourself available and being an advocate, because those employees refer their family and friends, not just to your company for business, but as employees. And that's how it works, especially in the Latino community. It's so influential of where they do business based on referrals and the authenticity. We get a ton of family members all across the organization simply because they believe that's a company that represents them, and you can grow your career.
Thank you. And we're gonna close it up with Nina, your final thoughts, and then we are done here.
Sure. Well, I think my colleagues did an excellent job at describing exactly what companies can do and what I have done in my own personal experience, and I can believe we can extrapolate this to companies in general, is really provide an opportunity. And it's the same answer for Hispanics than it is for African American, than it is for any human. If you provide an opportunity to work in a good culture for a purposeful company where you can see a career path, you can bring yourself, but we're social animals at the end of the day, and we look for fulfillment in our life. And so the culture of the company to me is that oxygen. It is the most valuable and the most important. It is what I have focused on in the last 25 years in the company that I run, to have a culture of fulfillment where people can see themselves fulfilled and they see a career ahead of them. So for me, it's all about culture.
Great. Well, that was great closing for all of us. Thank you so much to the whole panel and all the great work that you're all doing on behalf of diversity in general and specifically Hispanic diversity. So we thank you, and we look forward to connecting again on this topic down the road.